Thanks for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. For the foreseeable future, you're not going to hear our normal intro or outro here. We're going to be releasing episodes very frequently as things are changing. This channel will be used for a very specific purpose. Number one, to communicate with our patients. We're somewhat overwhelmed, and the more we can communicate breaking news and recommendations from us to our patients all at once, the better. So if you're a patient, we're here for you if you need us, but if possible, please tune in here so we can both keep you up to date and conserve our time for the most critical tasks. Feel free to share this with friends and colleagues as well. Number two, we've organized as a group. We have infectious disease specialists, ER doctors, critical care doctors, and in total dozens of MDs, PhDs, and frontline clinicians who are going to be constantly evaluating the news and emerging evidence. We're then going to summarize and translate that for you here every day on the podcast. The speed of change with the circumstances will make us look foolish at times, but we're committed to pouring all of our resources and energy into doing what we can to help and make a difference. You can also follow our updates at wildhealth.com or our Instagram account at wildhealthmd. And if you're a patient, we're here for you. Please tune in here for the updates and let us know how we can help. Good evening. Thank you for joining the Wild Health Daily Update. Today is Wednesday, April 8th. As of Tuesday evening, the CDC reports 395,000 confirmed cases and 12,754 deaths in the United States, a case fatality rate of 3.23%. As of this afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, Worldometer reports 410,916 cases and 14,210 deaths in the United States, and approximately 1.5 million cases and 87,000 deaths worldwide. Mike, I remember watching the news as the China cases climbed from 50 to 60,000. Honestly, at that time, to think that we would be at 410,000 in the U.S., that was just a few months ago. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's totally crazy. This is happening so fast. It's wild.
In global updates, data from the Financial Times shows that daily new cases in the United States may be plateauing, a few days behind a similar trend in the UK. The outbreak does continue to accelerate in Japan, albeit slowly. The total number of cases remains below 4,500. The 24-hour death toll in the United States, however, surpassed 1,850 on Tuesday, which is the single highest death toll reported by any country since the beginning of the pandemic. For the second day in a row, New York reported its highest single-day death toll yet. In his daily briefing, Governor Cuomo reported 779 new coronavirus deaths in the past day, bringing the total death toll in the state to more than 6,000. However, he once again pointed to the declining rate of hospitalizations as a better indicator that the outbreak may slow down in the next couple weeks. This morning, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that it had negotiated a nearly $500 million contract with General Motors to produce 30,000 ventilators by the end of August, which will be added to the federal stockpile. A little over 6,000 ventilators will be ready by June, which will increase what's believed to be left of the stockpile by 50%. I would point people to the podcast that we had with Dr. Scott Weingart. Actually, that'll be coming out in a few days now that I think about it. We had him on the summit, and we talked quite extensively at that time about we may be intubating more people than we need to. So as we continue to have issues with ventilators, I think we need to critically look at who actually needs a ventilator and who it may be actually more harmful than beneficial. So that podcast with Dr. Weingart will be coming out, but some of the points that he made are this seems to be a problem with oxygen more than ventilation, and potentially just giving patients oxygen and then rotating them, having them prone, be on their sides, and increasing oxygenation that way. And then there's some literature coming out about potentially hyperbaric treatment and other ways to increase oxygenation. That may be a better strategy. And if we did find out that was the right thing to do, it would alleviate some of this pressure on ventilators we continue to talk about.
He was also talking about non-invasive positive pressure ventilation like CPAP and BiPAP, which are things that you can do with a ventilator, but you can also do with less complicated equipment. So Mercedes recently just announced that they're going to be producing, I think it's 10,000 CPAP machines and donating those to the UK. So you're right, Matt. If we can get away with non-invasive or just oxygen therapy, that would definitely potentially help patients and definitely help with the ventilator shortage that we're dealing with.
When there's been such a focus on ventilators, I think if we could alleviate that burden by our usage, then those resources could be pointed to other areas as well. We have plenty of things to focus on and improve on when it comes to resources. The widely referenced statistical model that has been used to guide federal decision making has been revised downward. The model from the University of Washington decreased its projected number of coronavirus deaths by 26%, from nearly 94,000 deaths to 60,400 deaths by August. It also moved up its estimated peak day by 4 days, projecting that the highest number of U.S. deaths will now occur on April 12th. Statisticians caution, however, that these models rely on several assumptions, including human behavior, and will continue to shift in either direction as more data is gathered. So that is a big difference, 34,000 less deaths. But I want to kind of emphasize that last point, that human behavior will shift this in either direction. So this is not the time to celebrate for sure. It's the time to focus even more on what's working and kind of double down on the physical distancing.
All right, Matt, we've got 4 research articles to talk about today. 3 of them are actually about potential therapeutics, which is a nice positive thing to talk about for a change, as opposed to some of the negative research that we have to cover. First one is on convalescent plasma. So this one's collecting and evaluating convalescent plasma for COVID-19 treatment, why and how. It's a study from April the 3rd. And in this one, they talk about convalescent plasma, which is basically just plasma from patients who've already had COVID-19 and recovered from it. And they talk about how you could potentially use this as a means of therapy. The reason is because the plasma from patients who've already had it basically contains all the antibodies that their body produced to fight off the virus. The concept is you then give them that plasma and you're sort of skipping the step of the patient having to make their own antibodies, and you're giving them just this high dose of antibodies that they can then use to fight off the virus. This has been used previously for other viral infections, things like H1N1. It was actually used with SARS-CoV-1 back in 2003, and in general doesn't have many adverse reactions. It could be really important and could be a potential option. The only downside, I would say, is that it's fairly expensive. It does have very, very few negative downsides, but we're certainly going to have to study it a little bit more and figure out how we can produce large amounts of it. The other thing is you need to be really careful about when you get the plasma from the patient initially. So you want to get quality plasma that's got high levels of antibodies, but a cool and potentially life-saving treatment if we can get it to work.
Yeah, and it would be great if we had less expensive options, but honestly, the most expensive thing in the world is what's going on right now and not having options. So hopefully this will work out.
Yeah, I saw an article recently where somebody estimated the potential benefit from a single mask could be upwards of $4,000 to $6,000, if assuming you basically gave everyone a mask, and the downstream effect that would have on reducing infections, and then the overall basically cost benefit from that mask was $4,000 to $6,000. I can't really speak to the specific math on that very well, but it is interesting that, I mean, it's a great point. You know, this is extremely expensive for our country. So every little thing that we can do, even if it's actually expensive itself, could have a positive downstream effect on the economy.
Yeah, and I think we had a gut on this before. I mean, this is our gut intuition that the actions that we take now are going to have massive magnifying effects. And I think that mask is a good example. I don't know the math on that, didn't do the math on that, but when you just think about the R0 and how much this virus can spread and how quickly and how devastating it can be to the economy and to large numbers of people, yeah, every little thing matters. So that's why we just continue to talk about the physical distancing. I mean, the effects that you could be having by doing that could be massive when you compare it to the mask.
Speaking of another expensive potential therapeutic, this is an article called Inhibition of SARS-CoV-2 Infections in Engineered Human Tissues Using Clinical Grade Soluble Human ACE2. It's a study from April the 4th. It was in Cell. These are from authors that previously used recombinant ACE2 for SARS-1 and showed that they could basically block the replication of the original SARS virus. And they're back now basically doing the same thing with human recombinant ACE2. They found that they could reduce viral replication by up to 5,000 times in cell culture. So basically the theory is that if you just give ACE2 enzyme that's soluble in serum to basically to these cells that are being infected by the virus, all those ACE2 enzymes attach to the spike protein, which is how it typically gets into a cell. But if they're just floating around in the serum, they end up attaching to the spike proteins really well, and then they're competing now with the actual cells that have the ACE2 on them. So it's almost like sticking antibodies on all of the little spike proteins and preventing them from attaching to cells. So it makes tons of sense. The only issue that I see is that this was done in cell culture. And if this is basically something you're going to administer to someone in their serum, we really don't know how that ACE2 could potentially get out of the serum. Is it going to get, into the lung tissue where it could help block attachment and viral infection? Is it going to get into the nasopharyngeal epithelium or mucosa and block attachment there? So we don't, could it help prevent viral infection inside the blood vessels and in the kidneys? Sure, but we don't really know whether it's going to be effective in other tissues. So super interesting. Obviously, we're going to have to get some human studies to know more about it.
Yeah, it's hard to get excited about Petri dish studies right now, just knowing the length of time that it normally takes for that to actually be used in humans and the percentage of time it actually works out.
Well, then in that case, you'd be interested about this Petri dish study. The reason you would be interested in it is because it's about ivermectin, which is already an FDA-approved drug. So this is a drug that's on the market. We know you can use ivermectin. You could use it off-label now for anything you wanted to, and it may potentially get approved for use in SARS-CoV-2 if we get some more data. This study was called the FDA-approved drug ivermectin inhibits the replication of SARS-CoV-2 in vitro. So the study discusses basically the potential use of ivermectin, which is typically an antiparasitic drug, and repurposing it as an antiviral, which has been done previously. So ivermectin has been shown to reduce the infection of HIV, dengue virus, West Nile virus, Zika virus, several other viruses. In this particular study, they took cells that were infected with SARS-CoV-2, treated them with ivermectin, and by 24 hours, there was a 93% reduction in viral RNA and a 99.8% reduction in cell-associated viral RNA. So these are pretty big reductions. They estimated up to about a 5,000-fold in reduction of viral RNA between the ivermectin versus the non-treated group. So pretty cool stuff. This needs to be tested in humans, so in vivo, not in vitro, but could potentially be used a lot quicker than other things like that recombinant ACE2 or even the convalescent plasma, Matt.
Yeah, and this is more interesting just because we know the safety profile of this drug already. So it's not as big of a jump to think about using it in humans if this turns out to be effective.
The last article I'm not going to go into too much detail on. This one's interesting just because it does a really good job of describing the antibody test. This was a letter that was written to The Lancet. This was on April the 3rd. They talk about what antibody tests are. So basically, we're looking for the proteins that our immune system makes to help fight the virus. These are proteins that our immune cells produce that attach to the proteins on the virus. So things like the spike protein or the capsule protein of the virus, and they help sort of flag the virus for our immune system to attack. For the most part, most labs are concentrating on looking at the spike protein and the protein that makes up the capsule of the virus. And so far, over 70 companies have applied for emergency approval from the FDA. As far as I could tell, and I just recently looked at this again, there's only one that I'm aware of that's been granted emergency approval, and that's CellX, which was approved on April 1st, which is both an IgG and an IgM antibody test. I haven't been able to find any additional ones thus far.
And we actually have ours ordered, Mike, and we just got notification that they were shipping tomorrow. So we're excited about having those antibody tests.
All right, that's it for literature.
And that's it for the update today. Tomorrow morning on the podcast, it's going to be a surprise because I can't remember what we're publishing, and but it's going to be great. Trust me. And then tomorrow evening we'll be back with another update. In the meantime, I'm going to go work a shift in the ER. Can't wait.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Stay safe. Thanks so much for listening to this COVID-19 update. Please send us your questions or follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Wild Health MD. And just to be clear, this is not medical advice. No patient-physician relationship has been established, and this resource is really for general informational purposes only. And finally, if you want to spread the word, please send this podcast to friends and family and give us a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and stay safe.